Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast, episode 105. So we're starting year number 3. Different format tonight. I'm flying solo. Mark Hamlin, someone I grew up with. Mark Hamlin jokes. Smith, you need to sing solo. No one can hear you. Better off if you were to sing 10 or 12 miles down the road. I'm going to try to streamline the format. We had a great guest tonight, Ed Weiss. I'm going to call him up. He has a great background in tennis, lifetime in tennis. I would consider him, and this is an honor, a tennis junkie. I was a guest at his house. I just know the library. He's a student of the game. We're going to touch about many things, but one is also he's the author of the book written on Welby Van Horn. And what we're trying to do with the podcast is reinforce the messages from our 8 pillars. But let me call Ed on the phone. And I'm going to do this without any mistakes. My tech savvy. EW. Calling once. There's the first ring.
Hello.
Ed Weiss, Steve Smith, thanks for being a guest on the GreatBase Tennis Podcast.
Well, it is my honor that you asked me.
I know you love tennis. You've been in the game your whole life, one way or the other. Why don't we start to get this thing rolling? Tell us about your entry into tennis, early days.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Great Neck, which is a town on Long Island in New York. And my first love was baseball. My parents encouraged me maybe to try tennis, but I said, I'm not interested in that sport. All I want to do is play baseball. But I did go to a general camp in the summer. And one summer, I decided I was going to try tennis. And the head tennis counselor there was a gentleman named Larry LeBeau, who during the non-summer months was a math teacher at Trinity School, and flash forward a number of years, he was John McEnroe's high school tennis team coach. But Larry absolutely loved tennis, and he was a very quiet guy in some ways, but he was very inspiring. He loved to read about tennis and tell us the stories about tennis players. And I got the tennis bug, largely I think because he was so good about introducing kids to tennis at the camp. And I've been lucky enough to have a lot of really great mentors through the years, and he was the first one.
And how old were you at this time? And when, what reference to time? Was this, 70s?
I did it when I was about 11, or so. And then what he also did was, after the camp ended, he would take kids to the U.S. Open, which was then played at Forest Hills. And the first year I went was 1968, which was, of course, the first year that tennis went open. And that was just a magical U.S. Open because my favorite tennis player was Arthur Ashe, and he won. But just being there and seeing the pros up front, well, the pros and the amateurs, because at that point, more of the players were probably amateurs than pros, because that was the first year tennis went pro. And then I was lucky enough to see Ashe win the semifinal against Clark Gravener. And that, of course, was the match that then became the theme of maybe the best tennis book ever written, non-instruction, which was Levels of the Game by John McPhee.
Right.
Which, if anyone listening has not read that book, I would highly recommend it. He takes the match, McPhee does, and expands, from it to talk about the background of Ashe, who I think, a lot of your listeners know about his background. And then in contrast to Gravener's background, and it was just an absolutely fascinating book. It first started out as a series of, it was a long series of articles, I think, in the New Yorker, and then it turned into a book. But in any event, once I went to the U.S. Open the first time, I fell for tennis to hook, line, and sinker, and I started to play more and more. And then I was lucky enough to be taught by a gentleman named Bill Weisbuck, who was a very fine tennis teacher on Long Island. And he was, old school, but he was a huge believer in teaching fundamentals. He he was not too he didn't give you a lot of compliments unless you really did it correctly. And it took a long time for him to actually tell me that I was doing well. But he was a very good, a really good teacher. And something that was interesting, he had taught Budge Patty, who had won Wimbledon and French Open. And, I never knew that he taught Budge Patty. He never mentioned it in all the years I took lessons from Bill for maybe 4 or 5 years. Wow. He never mentioned it. And, can you imagine a pro today teaching someone who won Wimbledon and the French and not mentioning it? The only reason I ever found out was Budge Patty wrote a tennis book, and he talks about how his teacher was Bill Weiss. But in any event, I was very lucky to have Bill as my teacher, and then I just started to work harder and harder on my game, and eventually started to play in the Eastern tournaments. So I was lucky to have Larry and then Bill as my main teacher.
So 1968. What year did you graduate from high school?
1974.
1974. Big year in tennis. Jimmy Connors.
Yep.
Won 3 Grand Slams. They didn't allow him to play the French.
Correct.
You also trained under Dr. Alex Mayer, whose sons both were in the top 10 in the world, Sandy and Jean, correct?
Yeah. So, another, I think, outstanding quality to Bill Weissbuck was he wasn't afraid to have his students have the benefit of other teachers. And so Alex ran a tennis camp in Mount Freedom, New Jersey, at a school that during the non-summer months was like a military academy, but for high school students. They had a bunch of clay tennis courts, and Alex, who, as you mentioned, his 2 sons eventually became top 10 in the world. Alex and Alex Jr., known mostly as Sandy, and Jeannie Mayer. And Alex ran he was old school beyond old school. He was a really, really good tennis teacher. And he ran a kind of a no-nonsense camp. In the mornings, you would, after breakfast, he would gather all the campers, and you would have the stroke of the day, and he would demonstrate it to everybody on a court. And then every camper had to hit 4 or 5 balls in front of Dr. Mayer, who was a doctor. If you didn't do it right, he'd chew you out in front of the entire group of people. But underneath it, he was a caring guy. But he was tough. And then you were also videotaped. And then you went down to the courts and you worked on that stroke. So if it was a forehand, you'd work all morning on the forehand using the principles that Dr. Mayer taught, had lunch, and then all the campers were then shown the video that was taken when we all had the group session with Dr. Mayer in the morning. And then you got a semi-private or private lesson from the counselors, and the counselors were great. One of them was Carlos Gaffi, who became, on his own, a fantastic tennis coach.
Yeah.
And Alan Frost was there, who subsequently became quite a fine coach on Long Island. And then after that, you had matches. But Alex Mayer, he was very old school. I remember one time when we were doing stroke of the day, some of the kids were misbehaving. And the stroke of the day was done on a court that was on a little hill. And and there was a kind of a dirt road that went from the top court down to the other courts. And he made all the kids who were misbehaving crawl down on their knees to play on the lower courts. So he was tough, but he was a really good tennis man. He knew how to put your game together, not just only the strokes, but how to put your game together. And he also was like a big believer. He didn't even teach the first serve. He only taught the second serve because he thought the first serve for most people should be a variation on the second serve. Your first, the great second serve is the basis for a really solid tennis game. So he was great, and I really improved a lot when I was at the camp. He had a lot of other good campers, very highly ranked Eastern juniors who he taught. So it was a great environment to learn.
He was a Hungarian, correct?
Correct. Yes. The camp colors were the colors of the Hungarian flag. But I have, and he was tough. I mean, he used to send report cards back to the parents, and I remember I went all 8 weeks, and after the first 4 weeks, my parents got a report card that I hadn't been working as hard as I had the prior year in the camp, and that I needed to work harder on my game to go from, as he described it, pretty good to good. So it was old school, but it was always done because he cared. So I have very fond memories of him as a teacher as well.
Oh, the report card, that's a good way to sum up old school is,
yeah,
sending the report to the parents and the parents wanting to hear that, you need to work harder. And then on Long Island, that's a happening place. At that time, Harry Hopman was there. So you worked at Washington too. Yeah.
So Bill Weisbuck, my original teacher, actually had been at Port Washington, and he had a falling out with the owner, Hy Zausner. And so I was with Bill for a long, long time. But by the time I got to be a senior in high school, my game had progressed to the point where I really did need to go to the Port Washington program to really further progress. So I did go my senior year in high school, and the legendary coach Harry Hopman was the head of the program, and he brought the famous two-on-one Australian drills to Port Washington, and so I think it was on the Friday night program, I played for 2 hours with some good players, and we did two-on-one drills, and then we played points. But also what Port offered was you could play on open court time. And being in New York, being able to play in the winter was really critical to your progress, because you need to obviously play a lot to become good in tennis. And so after school, I would go down and play on the open courts. But Harry also would have a court where the kids who came down, he would, rotate kids and have them come on his court. There wasn't any charge. And he would personally work you out doing two-on-one drills. And that was an incredible experience. For those who don't know it, in addition to being a legendary Davis Cup coach, Harry was a great player himself. I think he got to the quarters of the U.S. Nationals, which then became the U.S. Open a couple of times. And even though he was older at that point, he could run the two-on-one drill it was amazing. He could put the ball on a dime so that he would hit the ball just far enough away from you that you could still get it if you used great effort. And so after 5 minutes where you were the one against the two, you were completely spent. The other thing I remember is doing it with him, and I was just kind of blasting every ball, and he took me aside and he said, "Ed, when you do these drills, you need to use your variety of shots. Use it as an opportunity to not only hit the ball hard, but also use your chips, your lobs, topspin lob, underspin lob." So that actually helped me a lot too, to help develop some variety in my game. So it was a great program, and a lot of really terrific players were there at the time, and that really helped my game as well.
Through that experience, that's where you met John McEnroe?
Yes, exactly. So I was in 12th grade, and John was in 9th grade. He was a 9th grader at the Trinity School, and he lived in Douglaston, and I lived in Great Neck, which is Great Neck and Douglaston are towns right next to each other. So I had my driver's license. So I used to give John lifts back from Port Washington with some frequency. But we played. And the interesting thing, a few stories about John. So I was in 12th grade, he was in 9th. And we would play in practice, and he would usually win. On occasion, I might win. But the matches were competitive in practice. But then I played him in a match. There was an internal tennis tournament at Port that Harry Hopman used to, on Sundays, have internal, within Port Washington Tennis Academy tournaments. But he took it seriously like a USDA tournament. And I played McEnroe in a match, and there was just no comparison to his practice. He was so much better in a match. In practice, I used to try to, at that point, his forehand was a little bit weak, and I used to jump on his forehand and come to net. And then when I played in the match, and all of a sudden his passing shots were 50% better. And he pretty much trashed me in the match. And it was, I don't think it ever changed for him. You always hear stories about McEnroe not being that great in practice. When I say relatively not great, he's always good. But in a match, he was just 3 times better. He was just a phenomenal competitor when it came to match play.
Well, we come back to McEnroe. I know you went to Stanford Law. I want to talk about McEnroe and Stanford tennis. But tell us about your progression from junior tennis to college tennis.
Yeah. So by the time my last year in the 18s in the East, I was ranked, I think, 8 in the East. And so I was able to play in the national junior circuit. And I played then the national hard courts were at Burlingame. The clay courts were in Louisville. And then there was the Western at Springfield, Ohio. And then I was lucky enough to play in Kalamazoo, which, was a great experience. Back then, parents didn't travel with you. You went to the tournament. Like, for example, in Louisville, we stayed at Bellarmine Junior College. You bunked with somebody. Someone had a car, and you would drive to the next tournament. And we stayed in the dorm in college in Springfield, and we stayed in the dorms in Kalamazoo. And I believe at Kalamazoo there was only one parent who actually came to the tournament. It was Howie and Dan Winisky's father came. I remember that. But other than that, there were no parents at all. There were some college coaches who came. And it was actually a great experience because I was on my own. I was responsible in some sense for myself. And it was actually a really good preparation for being away at college. And so that was a great experience. And then I went to Swarthmore College, which is a Division III school outside of Philadelphia, and they had quite a good team, and that attracted me to it. This is a good academic school, so that also appealed to me. The coach, Bill Cullen, was a very fine player himself. He won the ACC in singles when he played for number 1 for Wake Forest. But more importantly, there's just a great group of friends that I met at the school, friends to this day. Was just talking earlier today to my best buddy from Swarthmore, Jay Levinson, but super friendly with a bunch of the other guys on the team. And in '77, we won the NCAA Division III due to the efforts of the top 4 guys. And then my senior year, I was lucky enough to become Division III All-American. And that was something that, was kind of a culmination of the work I had put in. I never became a great player, but I felt good about, what I was able to do with whatever talents I had.
Anytime you hear national champion, even if it's in tiddlywinks, it's not easy. And then to be an All-American. Did you have the same college coach all 4 years? I did.
I will say, again, I've been very lucky that we didn't play as well in my junior year, even though we did win the title. Again, the workhorses were the top 4 guys in that team. And then I hooked up with a guy named Paul Linner, who was a coach at Hofstra, and he was just a fabulous coach. He had, believe it or not, he had been the head basketball coach at Hofstra. And he just understood athletics, and he was a fantastic coach for me. And I really improved. It was like things like he would tell me, hey, when the guy's got you on the run and you're in trouble, cut down your backswing because you're in an inherently unstable situation. So you need to reduce your variables when you're doing that. And he was very encouraging, great guy. And then he moved to Florida and was the number 1, in like the 70 and over or 55 and over in Florida. So he was a terrific player. He was number 2 in the juniors behind Dick Savitt way back in the day in the East. But he was a fantastic coach, and I attribute my progress in my senior year to him. So again, was very, very lucky to always have good mentors and teachers along the way. And honestly, very lucky to have parents who supported my tennis journey. I was fortunate. My dad was a successful attorney, and he was able to, afford that for me. And, that is something that I love tennis so much that, I'm sure we'll probably get to it. I always said to myself, well, I was lucky enough because my dad, was able to pay for tennis lessons and all that. But a lot of people can't. So I feel very passionately about trying to bring the sport to people who don't necessarily have those means to be able to play tennis.
Yeah, we certainly need to touch upon the nonprofit, the NJTL. I know I was fortunate to go spend a weekend with your team. But
yeah.
After Swarthmore, you went straight to Stanford Law?
Well, a little bit of yes and no. I had taken a semester off to play in what should have been my fall season in my senior year. I played tennis tournaments down in Florida, played the Florida men's circuit. That actually really helped my game as well, in addition to Paul Leonard's help. And so I had to finish. So I played this in the spring for the team, because there really wasn't much of a fall season back then for college tennis. And so I had to finish up at Swarthmore in the fall of 78. Yeah, I think I have that right. So I actually had some time between then and law school, and I got a teaching job, believe it or not, teaching tennis in Belgium. And that was the Swarthmore tennis coach. My coach left to go to Brown, and there was a new coach at Swarthmore, Mike Mullen, who was a great tennis coach and played number 2 for Berkeley. And Mike had been the pro at this club in Belgium, and he said, "Ed, you want to do it?" I mean, it would never happen in today's world, right? But I went over there, and I was, believe it or not, even though I just graduated college, I was a head tennis pro at this tennis club in Eupen, Belgium. Beautiful red court.
Did you teach in French or Flemish or English?
I learned enough. It was a part of Belgium that had been Germany until the Treaty of Versailles, and it was taken away from Germany and given to Belgium, that part of Germany. So many of the people actually spoke German. And I learned a little bit of German, but unlike the States, they, back then, language in Europe has always been very seriously taught in the schools. And so almost all the kids could speak English. So I was kind of spoiled. I was able to basically get by on just a little German and very little, I would emphasize, and basically be able to teach in English.
Did you play? Did you play club tennis in Europe when you were there?
No, I did not. They had a big tournament at the club, and I played in that. That people from all over came. I had some very good men players and guys that used to be on the circuit. A couple of guys who had played in the French Open played in the men's division there. But no, I did not play club tennis there when I was there.
So with Stanford, when you were there, did you have any time to hang out and watch the Stanford tennis team? Men and women, both successful?
Oh, yeah. So, right after Swarthmore, I went to Stanford Law School. First semester of law school was pretty rough. I kind of got the hang of it first semester to some degree. And so I did have time for tennis and to watch tennis. And at that time, Dick Gould was the tennis coach at Stanford. And they had an unbelievable team. Tim Mayotte was the number 1 player one of the years that I was at the law school. And Tim, by the way, is a very friendly guy. I got to know him a little bit. Terrific guy. Jimmy Gerfine, who got the finals of the NCAAs, was there. Peter Renner, who got the finals of the singles of the NCAAs, was there. So 2 of the 3 years that I was at the law school, the Stanford tennis team won the NCAA. And
was McEnroe there when you were there?
He had already, he only played there 1 year.
1 year, okay.
Yeah. And what was interesting about Dick Gould is everything was focused on winning the NCAAs, and he was very explicit about it. Our goal is to win the NCAA. You might say, well, that created some pressure on the guys, but these were all experienced, terrific players. And the whole season was geared to peak for the NCAA tournament. And so, he could work on technique, but I think his greatest skill was just being able to know the right buttons to push for the kids and to get them playing their best when it mattered the most. But I used to go and watch the dual matches when they played UCLA, USC, Berkeley, and there were some great matches that I got to watch, the dual matches when I was there. And they also got they had a ton of tennis courts there, and there were some guys at the law school who I played with. One of my classmates played for Berkeley. So I got to keep up my tennis when I was at Stanford. So it was a great experience, and I also met some great lifetime friends when I was at the law school as well.
And with your career as a lawyer, have you made time to play tournaments? Did you play any of the age group tournaments?
I would say not. I have not played the tournaments. What I did do for years and years was I joined a local swim and tennis club, and every Wednesday night the clubs would play other clubs, and so I played for my club. I was on 2 or 3 different clubs through the years, and I played every Wednesday night doubles, and it was very, very good tennis. A lot of guys who played in college played in this league. So if you're a competitive tennis player, you don't you want to play well. So even though it was only once a week where you played other teams, I would work on my game as much as I could during the week, so that I could feel that I could compete reasonably well in this kind of inter club league. So I did play competitive tennis. It wasn't USTA tournaments, but it was competitive tennis.
Ed, with your career as a lawyer, how much did you draw from your background as a player? Your background as a player, as a competitor, must have helped you with being a lawyer.
Yes, I think it did. When particularly maybe younger in my career, when you get into some tough negotiations, and just tennis teaches you. I took me a long time as a player to conquer my temper and emotions, and eventually I did. And just being able to learn, the emotional control of competing and keeping your emotions helped me when I was an attorney, and to be able to negotiate, but not let my emotions get the best of me, and look at things in a kind of clear-eyed fashion. And just the whole experience of what it's like to have to work at your craft. I learned from, definitely, my tennis helped me a great deal there, and to deal with the frustration. I was a good player. If you want to say I was a good player, maybe I was a good player. But I certainly wasn't a great player. But I had to work hard for whatever I was able to achieve. And so I did learn, I think, the lessons of, working hard. And even if you work hard, you don't always get rewarded, but you're always trying to work towards a goal. And in the law, it was to become accomplished in my field to the extent I could be. And so, yes, I think tennis really, really did help a lot. It also helped because it was I joined the firm after practically 4 or 5 years. I joined the firm. I was the 5th lawyer to join, and it was the firm had only started a year before, And we really had to work really, really hard to make the firm a success. Now we have like 65 or 70 lawyers at the firm. But it was 7 days a week of working hard as an attorney. And being able to have tennis as an outlet where I could just do something, not the law, and just throw myself into something I truly loved, was just really great, because I was able to bring myself away from something I was really working on intensely and do something else that I truly loved. And I was able to just kind of not think about work in those couple hours that I might be on the court a few times a week. So tennis was really helpful to me in that regard as well.
And you're finishing up your career? You're about to retire?
Yes. This will be my last year as a partner at the firm. I might do some consulting / be what they call counsel next year. That's to be determined. But this is my last year as a partner at the law firm.
So how many years did you practice law?
From 1982 to today.
Wow. Congratulations. You've been a hobby coach, a volunteer coach pretty much throughout your time, though. You found time to teach tennis. Yes.
So, again, just because I love the game so much and I wanted to, have other people have the experience with it. So I have two children. My son, Will, I taught tennis to, and he liked tennis. But I started teaching some kids in the local town that we live in because I, quickly realized that it would be better for my son to be with other kids rather than having his dad tell him what to do. And so I started teaching other kids in town, and a few of them went on to play in the New England tournaments, and some of them went on to play in college, and I helped them develop their games. And I just started then working as my son got older and played in high school. I started working with the high school kids in town and expanded that. And then I got an opportunity was introduced to a NJTL, Norwalk Grassroots Tennis and Education, which is now Norwalk Stanford Grassroots Tennis Education. And that was maybe about 13 years ago. And I've devoted a lot of my free time to that organization, working with kids. And the basic purpose of the organization is through tennis and life skills to give kids a foundation for success, both in tennis, but also in the classroom and in life. Everyone finds their calling in life to try to help. And this became my calling, trying to help the organization. And I did it, a great deal on the weekends. And now that I'm not as active in my practice, I go down there many days during the week to do volunteer coaching on the court to help. I was also on the board of directors for a long time, and my wife became quite involved in the organization. So it was something that I fell in love with, everyone has to find their path to try to help. And I was lucky enough to find an organization that gave me an opportunity to take my love for tennis and hopefully help some kids.
And is your wife, did she play as well?
No. I always say my toughest student was my son, and then my daughter came along, and she proved to be even, she fell in love with running. So, and she still runs to this day. She runs some marathons, and she's a very good high school runner. And so, but I taught her tennis, and she still, has nice strokes, and she plays. I tried teaching my wife. That was probably the hardest battle. So my wife doesn't really play. She stays in shape otherwise, and she loves to watch tennis, and she used to watch my matches, but she does not really play. But she was the president of the charity that I've been involved in, the grassroots. So she got involved in that way on the, kind of the running the organization side.
Well, coming back to your childhood idol of Arthur Ashe, his advice was never teach your spouse.
Arthur was a very wise man.
With facilities, what do you do for facilities? You have to rent indoor courts? You have to raise money for that?
Yeah. So in the outdoors, when the weather is good, we had a very successful capital campaign that we raised a fair amount of money, and then went, and also the city of Norwalk put in money, and the USTA put in money, and Alan Rippey Foundation put in money, and we raised enough money to build 6 beautiful full size courts, and we have 2 small courts for the little ones, and they put in what they call post tension concrete courts, and which are designed to not crack, and they've been holding up beautifully. So we have great outdoor facilities. Indoors is tougher. We do have to rent courts, and yes, we need to raise money every year for that. And that is a challenge in developing kids in the program, because if you only play once or twice a week, it's tough to really get that much better in the winter. But we do what we can do, and there's some clubs that around here that donate time to us. Stanford, Solaris, and other Four Seasons, and other clubs that I should be remembering. Chelsea Piers and other, they do donate some courts, but we also have to rent courts as well. So it is a challenge, but we do the best we can.
Oh, that's great. It's a great service that you've provided. Very admirable. With being a writer, but before you were a writer, you were a reader. Tell us a little bit about your tennis library. What are some of your favorite books?
Right. So, going back to Larry LeBeau, who first was my first kind of inspiration, he loved tennis books. And so I kind of got the bug. And so over the years, I've bought purchased and read, I don't know, maybe I have a few hundred tennis books. I guess my first one I really delved deeply into was Tilden's Match Play and Spin of the Ball, and also How to Play Better Tennis. And I think there's still things that are relevant in Match Play and Spin of the Ball. Remember, one of his phrases was, spin means control in tennis. And we certainly see that today with all the topspin in today's game, and enhanced by the strings. But I really loved that book. Ed Faulkner's book on teaching tennis was really, really good. There's just a number of books that I enjoyed and got things from. I would say that reading books helped me more be a tennis coach than necessarily a player, because I might have had too many ideas about how to play. But I think as a tennis teacher, it really, really helped. Because I can tell a story from a book, or an illustration from a book, or a different way to teach a teaching concept from a book. So I really feel that reading about the game, and also reading World Tennis Magazine and then Tennis Magazine, and about the history of the game, I think really helped round out my knowledge of the game. One of my other favorite old books was Techniques of Winning by Leighton. And that's the first time I read. There was some Welby Van Horn did a few chapters in that book, and so did Dennis Vandermeer and Chet Murphy. And that's a great old book, and some of the stuff in that book still applies today. So those were some of my favorites, but I'm sure I'm forgetting some that really were helpful to me as well.
Going back to Ed Faulkner, to me, that's one of the only books where he analyzed the strokes of club players.
Yeah.
Instead of analyzing the strokes of professional players. But yeah, Ed Faulkner's book, he went to Cornell, and he didn't get a degree. He just took classes that he thought would help him become a better tennis teacher. But he was one of the best known tennis teachers in the 60s. There was Jim Layton, and Cap Layton, right? So I have a copy of the book where, Welby had never really, he was part of that book, but he never really finished the book himself.
Yeah, no, there was chapters on his balance method
Right.
in the book, and there was actually some very nice. He demonstrated the strokes, and so it's always helpful because most people are visual learners to have pictures of the strokes. So that was really helpful. By the way, Faulkner was the tennis coach at Swarthmore for like 40 years. I did not play for him, but I only hear amazing things about him. There are people who say the best teacher they had at Swarthmore was Faulkner, right? Even though they had some great professors there. There are many, I met several people who said he was the best teacher they ever had at Swarthmore. So I didn't play for him. He had retired by then, but
He had very successful camps too. Ron Woods, who was the first director of player development for the USTA, he worked at Faulkner's camps, and I had a chance to meet members of his family, but I never really met Ed. Have read this book? We used his book in the course I had for tennis teachers, the degree plan. But yeah, I always heard great things about Ed Faulkner. Chet Murphy, Bill Murphy. I can remember having a team at the Junior College Nationals, and one of my friends was friends with Chet Murphy, and he'd retired, and he hung out with us every day, all day for the week that we were there. That was really cool.
Yeah.
But Chet and Bill, they both wrote several books.
Yeah, they wrote several books, and I still recommend them. I think there's still a lot of value in the books that they wrote.
Oh, for sure. When you say relevant, of course, I mean, so many things stand the test of time. Go ahead on Chet.
Well, Chet was a coach at Berkeley for a number of years. And Mike Moen, who then became the Swarthmore coach after the coach I played for left, just spoke incredibly highly of Chet. And he would have phrases like, in tennis, you want to move fast and slow. In other words, you want to do your split step and get in position and do your running when the ball is in the air. Then you can obviously take your little adjusting step. A lot of people, when they play tennis, they don't do their running until the ball bounces. And so he had lots of nice phrases to teach. And he really brought a lot to Mike when he played for Berkeley, and Mike took that and was a great coach at Swarthmore. So, it's these lines, right? Everyone has their mentor, and they learn from their mentor, and then they become mentors to other people. And, that's how the world ideally works.
Oh, all the connections. I do think that less and less so people don't really have a coaching tree that they're proud of. But Chet Murphy, I can remember he was very clever with volleys. He taught the drag volley, the snap volley, the swing volley, the touch volley. So all the drop volley. And it's true. I mean, the ball's hit right at you. I mean, you have to be able to improvise within a fundamental range of correction.
Correct.
And then tell us about you wrote the book on Welby, but your goal initially was to write a book based on several tennis teachers, correct?
Right. So I had this crazy idea. I was working, very tough, very hard hours at my job, and had 2 kids, and thank God my wife Karen did a great job raising the kids. But I tried to be a committed father too, and I was working very hard at at a law firm. But I just had this crazy idea that I was going to try to write a tennis book, and my original idea was that I would do one chapter on. I'd have a bunch of tennis pros who I had read about and respected from what I could see their results were, and I would do one chapter for each pro. And I started off with Welby because he was getting on in years, and I said, well, you never know what can happen to someone when they're getting on. And so I started with him, and I figured I would start with him, do a chapter on Welby, and then move on to other teachers. And so I called him up, and I said, would you like to do this? And, I was a little bit nervous because he's a legendary coach. And he said, sure. Yeah, why not? And he was in California, in Palm at Palm Springs at the time, and I was in Connecticut, and there was no internet at the time, and certainly even Welby would have never used the internet even if there was an internet. We just talked on the phone, and then he started faxing me. He did have a fax, these long handwritten notes. And I got more and more into it. And at some point, I said to myself, I'm just going to do a book on Welby's methods. And so I would somehow, put the kids to bed at 9 o'clock, and I would work on the book for an hour or two before I went to bed, and work on it some on the weekends. And I would send chapter by chapter to Welby, and he would look at it and tear it apart and make changes and send back faxes, and went back and forth. Probably, I think it took me 5 years to write the book.
Wow.
And he took all the photos in the book. He had 2 young students at the time. He was fully, he was retired as a tennis teacher, but he had done all his, great work in Puerto Rico and then in his camp on the East Coast. But he did do a little coaching, volunteer coaching, if you will, of some juniors. And at the time, he was teaching 2 sisters, and he took pictures of them demonstrating the strokes. And we just basically did it over the phone and over the fax. I did go out to visit him 2 or 3 times. I would go during the Indian Wells tournament in Palm Springs, and I actually stayed with him during the tournament, and we would just work on the book during that time as well. And as I said, it took 5 years to put together, but it was a great experience because I really learned what it was like to be a master at your craft from Welby. Like all great teachers, whether it was Dr. Mayer or Bill Weissbuck that I had or Welby, they understood the whole process. They knew where it was all going. Even if you, from your first lesson on, if you kept with it, they saw the whole vision of where it would ultimately end up if you wanted to become an accomplished player. He obviously had that, but he had fantastic ways of explaining things to people. And he had his method, his balance method, which was meticulously thought out. I just learned a tremendous amount about how to teach, as well as just the particulars of his system when we put together the book.
So many great compliments. Dr. Mayer said he was asked about his tennis teaching, and he said, well, I think I'm one of the top 5 tennis teachers in the world. And then someone said, what about Welby Van Horn? And he said, no one compares to Welby.
Yeah. I think for learning the fundamentals, he was as good as it gets. And he could teach an advanced player too, but and that's what made him unique, because he was a fantastic player. He got to the finals of the U.S. Nationals, now the U.S. Open, losing to Bobby Riggs. And he got there when he was, I think, was he 19? He was a teenager.
19 years old, right.
Yeah. And he was the youngest finalist in history until Pete Sampras got to the finals and won it the first year he won the U.S. Open. And so usually people who are fantastic players, when they become coaches, they're more are on the side of helping players who are already developed their strokes. But Welby was that rare bird who was an incredible player, but who really specialized in and absolutely loved teaching the fundamentals of tennis to people, whether they were juniors or adults.
No, for sure. Welby, I remember studying under Dennis Vandermeer for the first time, and I asked Dennis, who else would you recommend? And he said, Welby Van Horn. He said, I think he's the best junior tennis teacher in the world, but he's probably the worst resort tennis teacher in the world. Because with Welby, why don't you tell the listeners how do those first few lessons go?
Say that. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Well, to tell the listeners how the first few lessons go, where you're really, it's not like you're hitting a lot of balls.
Oh, your first lesson with Welby, you're not even going to hold a tennis racket.
Right.
He had what's called the balance method, but just to think of it as a balance method, I think kind of oversimplifies it. He basically taught you all the body positions through the entire stroke. So in other words, you have the ready position, but then you turn. We now call it the unit turn. But you turn your body, whether for forehand or backhand, and then you further turn your body. And then if you step in for square stance, and what you do with your left arm, and what you do with your hips and your shoulders after you do the full turn, and then you go into the contact, and then you're finished. And he would have you go through the whole stroke just holding your hips and showing you each position in each phase of the stroke. And you would not hold a tennis, as I said, you would not hit a single tennis ball in that first or even the first couple of lessons. And he would show you the body positions that your body should be in to be in balance. And he was, very big on maximum effort with the maximum results with the minimal amount of effort. And, when you see a beautiful tennis player or a beautiful skier or whatever, it's just the beautiful economy of motion that you see in people who really master their sports.
Remember Frank DeFord's feature article in Sports Illustrated, but it's really interesting that Welby, he certainly had his followers, but he didn't really get connected with the governing body of tennis. He never spoke, I should say governing bodies, the USTA and the USPTA. USPTA came along in 1927, the PTR in 77. But you would think that it would have been mandatory to learn the Welby Van Horn balance approach. Because I agree. Yeah. I don't, to this day, I don't think anyone has shown a better way to introduce the game to beginners.
Yes. I would say, and I'm not trying to say things were always better in the old days, because there are many, many things that are way better today. Flat statement. But, his methods were really great. I would say if you're teaching today, in doing that, you probably have to integrate, some, quote unquote, fun things where the kids are working on their balance, but, relay games or other things, because to teach a kid in today's world a full hour where all they're doing is putting their hands on their hips and their balance positions, that may not be completely realistic, but I think you could do a major part of the lesson doing that, and then just integrate it with some other stuff, that is still helping the kids with their coordination or balance, and make it fun. And the biggest thing for any tennis teacher, I think, is just the enthusiasm that you bring to the table. And if you have a love for, if you're enjoying the lesson as a tennis teacher, there's a very good chance that your students are also enjoying it.
No, that's a great point. Peter Burwash, the late Peter Burwash, used to always say that. It's the personality of the pro.
Yeah.
With early childhood development, if kids were to be learning how to throw and catch and run and dribble a soccer ball, basketball, and doing multiple sports, but just going really slow with the tennis, it would be much better. So it's not instruction, destruction. Yeah, so I do think that the 3 E's of a lesson, you have to camouflage the education. You have to hide the education. So you can be upfront with the exercise and the enjoyment, but there was no hiding it. It was like, this is what we're doing.
No, Welby, Welby was a legendary guy, right? So that helped him to be able to do what he did, right? He was a fantastic player. He was top 10 in the world in the amateurs and top 10 in the world when he did turn pro. And he then developed a legendary tennis teaching career. So when you have that gravitas, like Lansdorf, I'm sure Robert Lansdorf, he doesn't fool around in the lessons at all. But he's got the gravitas to be able to do that. Most tennis teachers, aren't so lucky, and so we have to kind of integrate different elements to it. And obviously, as someone gets better and better, the mix goes more and more towards just serious work in the lessons. The other thing I just kind of I've learned through the years as a teacher, if you want to try to develop juniors, you have to make a decision that, yes, you want to earn a living if you're a tennis, and I always had the advantage I didn't have to make any money as a tennis teacher. But if you want to develop junior players, you're just going to have to devote time to working with them that you're not going to be compensated for, right? If your goal is to develop top, really good junior players, you're just going to have to go to the tournaments and watch them play and work with them, and you won't get paid all the time. But if you're, if you get your true satisfaction in seeing junior player develop their game, that's the satisfaction you get. I don't knock someone who doesn't want to do that, just wants to teach tennis for different reasons. That's great. But certainly one thing I've kind of learned along the way is if you're really in the game of developing junior players, you're just going to have to, spend time where it's just you're devoting your time to the players over and above what you're getting paid for.
No, that's a very good point. Psychic income, where it's
exactly.
It's just good for the mind, good for the soul.
Yeah.
It's you take your work home with you. It can be 24/7.
Yeah. Well, that was another thing Welby told me, is that he would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about how to help a student. He was just really, really devoted to helping his students become as good as they could be.
Well, there's certainly a lot to be said for being able to demonstrate. Welby could play so well with his opposite hand. He used the old Dunlop Max Ply, which McEnroe in '79 was in the U.S. Open Finals, where Welby used the same racket in '39. But Welby used to have a racket with no strings, and he would play the 10, 11, 12-year-olds. And, of course, he would hit right on the yoke, the throat of the racket, and come to the net.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I remember asking him one time, I said, Welby, you never, ever miss an overhead. And they said, well, how's that? He goes, well, when I was a kid, there was no TV. And he goes, you can practice an overhead all day long. You just find an empty tennis court, and you throw up the lob. You just self-feed a lob, and you hit overheads all day long.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was also huge into backboard practice. And we have a chapter in the book about just all the different drills that he used on the backboard. And then he was huge on mirror practice. And he said, look, it's back then there wasn't, you didn't have a camera on your phone. iPhones didn't exist. And it was, video equipment was expensive to have. And so that wasn't how you would do it. You would look in a mirror and practice your strokes. And I still think till today, practicing your strokes in front of a mirror is a fantastic way to do it. And I actually came across an article. There's a guy, is it Casey Curtis, who was Milos Ramos's.
Yeah, I just was talking to him this weekend at a tournament, the Battle of Boca. Yeah, Casey Curtis. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, he's a fantastic coach. And he developed someone else who got to the finals at Junior Wimbledon in doubles. So, a great coach. And he wrote an article I came across recently comparing Federer. He wrote it a while ago, comparing Federer and the dancer Baryshnikov, and how dancers practice in front of the mirror. And I think that Casey uses the mirror a lot with his junior players. And you're able to see what you're doing on your stroke, and you kind of develop a mental image of what you're doing. So, old school can be new school, right?
Right.
And really happy to read that article by him, and then be able to connect it to kind of the wisdom of Welby as well.
With Welby, his students, it was an hour-and-a-half cycle for a half-hour lesson. You'd hit the backboard for 30 minutes, and he could see you out the corner of his left eye. And then after your lesson, you would shadow swing from his pro shop window out of the corner of his right eye. And it was just a matter of conquering basics. You just had to be able to hit the basic shots. And then, from that, Welby's approach was from the basic shots you can grow, the specialty shots, and then the emergency shots.
Yeah. Yeah. No question about it. No question about it. And the last couple of years, I've actually been a coach of a high school tennis team. And I certainly use, and like many high school tennis teams, the kid at the top is he's a terrific player, 4-star recruit. But then I have kids who are literally basically beginners on the team, and definitely using Welby's methods along with things I've learned from you and other coaches that I've had the good fortune to learn from. But I've been able to help the kids during the high school season become better. It's just we only have 2.5 month season, but it's been very rewarding, and just having that grounding in Welby's system has really, been a blessing for me and able to help the kids.
No, that's great. With the book, tell us about the success of the book. I mean, some feedback from having published the book.
Yeah, I mean, we self-published it. So I think we had maybe did 300 or 400 copies. We sold it at the Indian Wells tournament. Charlie Passarell, who was Welby's most famous student and was number one in the U.S., and then very successful pro tennis career, and then became the tournament. Basically, he and Ray Moore were the ones who developed the Indian Wells tournament. They eventually sold it. Sorry, I lost my thread. What was I talking about?
Just the book, as far as readership.
Feedback. So yeah, we sold. Charlie was gracious enough to allow us to sell this book at the tournament, and we sold out eventually all the books. And so over the years, I've gotten some very nice emails and letters from people who read the book. We've got some very nice reviews on Amazon about the book. And what people have said, and I'm kind of humbled by what they say, is that the book really explained Welby's system in a kind of comprehensive and understandable way. And I do think my training as a lawyer helped, because I try to be precise as a lawyer. And when I wrote the book with Welby, I really tried to be as precise as possible and kind of imagine the reader in my mind and try to use language which was as clear as possible to explain things. And we also have a number of photographs in the book as well to demonstrate. But we've got some very, very nice feedback from people who read the book, including his former students, who have said that it's a good, true representation of his system. We did try to modernize it. We talk about the open stance and other things in the book as well. But I would describe it as Welby's system with some modernization, is how I would describe what's in the book.
Welby, I spent time with Welby when he was in assisted living here in South Florida. And it was so fun to be watching a Roger Federer match with Welby from beginning to end. And of course, when Welby taught, players played with wooden rackets.
Yep.
And then, of course, 3 of the 4 Grand Slams were on grass. And there was, like, say, at Wimbledon, where the weather, there's a lot more rain in England than Australia or even New York. And they didn't have the tarp. So by the second week, the players are wearing spikes.
Yep.
So the game was not to let the ball bounce. Everything was serve and go forward. And Welby, he knew, he was still his own best critic. He knew in the end that he used the term championship grip. This is a beginner's grip, just referring to the forehand. And in the championship grip, it was referred to as an Australian grip as well, a composite. It wasn't a full Eastern. And, where someone like Federer, would turn the unit turn, we return serve, he's set for a volley, he has the options, but then he, closes the racket head.
Yeah.
Becker came along and he was a role model for Federer. People said and that was way before they changed the grass at Wimbledon. People would say that you could never win Wimbledon with an extreme forehand grip, but Becker did. he had the option of returning with the grip, we call it number 3, the Braden system, the numerical system. But then he turned the grip towards 4, which helped him close the racket face.
Right.
So Welby was still studying and still saying this could be done better. This could be done better.
Right. That's what a great tennis teacher should always do. Right. You teach what at the time you think is the best way to teach, but if something comes along and it's something's better, whether you're a tennis teacher or you're a trainer, you have to evaluate it and you have to adjust. I remember hearing a lecture by Dennis Vandenveer said the same thing. He said, "Yeah, if I had to throw out certain things I used to do, but that's okay. That's the process of learning."
Yeah, with one of our podcasts, we dedicated 1 or 2 to late Jim Verdick, and then we interviewed one of his sons, Doug Verdick, and he had listened to the podcast, and he said that there's some things that we talked about that when he played for his father that he didn't do. So yeah, you're always trying to tweak and improve. Vandermeer used to always say that too many tennis teachers have, they've taught tennis for 30 years, but they just have 1 year experience because they keep doing the same thing.
Right.
In my library with Braden, I have a film of Vic teaching tennis in the 60s. And it's just amazing how much he improved. He used to just always say is that if someone can provide the logic and the scientific rationale, you just make the change. You say, okay, this is a better way to do it. And you just tell your students, this is newfound information and we have to make this change to improve.
Right. Well, I think as a tennis teacher, one of the best ways to become better is to watch master teachers teach. And that, in particular, if they teach at a public facility, just watch what they do and absorb what they do. And then take that and try to, in your way, own personal way, make that part of your teaching. And so when I have had the opportunity to go and try to watch various teachers, I try to do that and learn from them. And I would encourage anyone to do that. And you're always trying to learn. And that's a great way of doing it. If you have the opportunity to pick out someone in your area that has developed a lot of good juniors and kind of just watch what they do. And that will help your own personal teaching.
No, for sure. I think it's, certainly, pat on the back for, people who go to tennis teaching conferences. I certainly spend a lot of time at tennis teaching conferences, but I think you're much better off to actually go and watch someone teach. Just go to where they are working and see what they do for 3 or 4 days. That's not that long, but it's certainly much better than a 1 hour presentation.
Yeah, I mean, both have their value, but yes, I would think, and seeing how that master teacher works with different students, right? A student that is a young 7 or 8 year old kid who's just learning, maybe a 13-year-old who's great, and then a 13-year-old who is more playing tennis for recreation, and how they approach those different 13-year-olds differently, and also similarities as well. So it's not just the technical information, it's how they interact with the students, and that you can learn from as well.
So you were playing high school tennis and college tennis in the heyday of the tennis boom.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on tennis in the U.S. today with pickleballs invading our courts, and it seems like there's too many empty courts and less people are playing than before? What are your thoughts on how to improve American tennis?
Well, I'm not going to have any brilliant insights because it's a topic that people much smarter than me have addressed and invested a lot of time thinking about. So I will just pick out one aspect which is something I'm now involved in, which is high school tennis. When you look at the number of kids who play high school tennis, I think you would probably know better than me, Steve, but I think it's 200,000 or 300,000 kids play high school tennis.
I'm not sure how many.
Yeah, it's a lot. And then you compare that to how many are playing in the USTA tournaments, and that is probably something like 5,000 or 10,000 kids. So, and I'm not the one that can come up with this term, but high school tennis is kind of the sleeping giant that we have in our country. And so I think that if we could get, and there are some very fine high school tennis coaches, but if we could put an emphasis on having, better and better overall high school tennis coaches and do what we can to help those coaches who are coaching become better coaches, that in the long run will really help them tennis. Because if you think about it, tennis is a family sport, right? I mean, most people play because someone in their family likes tennis or encourage them to play tennis. So if you can make the high school tennis experience better, say for the kids that are on my team, right? And not all of them will fall in love with tennis, but if some of them really increase their enthusiasm level for tennis, most of my kids will not play in college, but as far as playing college tennis, but they may play on club tennis or just otherwise enjoy the game. And then when they become parents, they will encourage their kids to play. So if we can improve high school tennis and make it a better experience for people when they're on the team and help fall in love with tennis, in the long run, that will, it will take, it's not going to be an overnight sensation or development, but I think that would really, really help because there still are high school teams where the coach doesn't really know anything about tennis. You would never have a football team coached by someone who didn't know anything about football, right?
Right.
Anything that we can do to help high school tennis, I think, will resound in the long run to the benefit of the game. I also think what you're doing with your site and trying to get information out on how to properly teach tennis fundamentals, and making that available for free. And so if someone who's interested in tennis and can't afford tennis lessons for their child, to be able to go onto the site and to be able to learn the proper tennis fundamentals that is something that's really, really important. I would like, that information to, be as accessible to people as possible.
Well, I appreciate saying that. We'll come back to your book. We've talked about putting your book on the website. We met with Welby's son, Stuart. But I like the term sleeping giant. With our podcast, we interviewed 2 high school coaches. We recommend our listeners to go back and listen to those segments. I would like to see where the kids that are homeschooling, that they still play, their parents are taxpayers, that they still play high school tennis. I think it's unfortunate, the expression that the individual has become bigger than the program. Now, when you were in high school, everybody played. All the top juniors played high school tennis, correct?
Well, John McEnroe played for Trinity, which is a private school in New York. And yeah, when I was in the East, last year in the 18s, there was actually 3 guys who was try number 1. Johnny Gross, who then played at Princeton. He played high school tennis. John Nolan, who played in the U.S. Open eventually, 1 year qualified. He played for his team. And Carrie Leeds played for his team. Carrie then 1 year, I think, got to the quarters of the Knicks in Wimbledon. There was no one who didn't play for their high school team.
Yeah, all these names. I remember when I was in charge of Seguzo Bassett as a tennis director, working with Carrie Leeds. He played at Yale, correct?
Yes, he played at Yale. He tragically died young.
Yeah.
But his family has been phenomenal in putting money towards not only Yale tennis, but they have a fantastic NJTL type facility down in New York.
Well, there's the facility named after him, correct? Amazing facility.
Exactly.
So what
Exactly.
is it in the Bronx or Queens? Not sure. I've been to it. Their U.S. juniors were there one year.
Yeah. I haven't been there personally, but I know that the facility was named after him. Correct. Yeah. I think high school tennis is, and you know what, you're representing your school, and I think that's the big deal. Not to be trite about it, I had one student who went on to win the Connecticut high school tennis championship, and when he goes and interviews for a job, and he writes down in his resume, tennis, Connecticut high school tennis champion, that means a lot more to a potential employer than, I was ranked number 9 in New England or 8 in New England, right? So you do it for the right reasons, which is to play for your school and to learn how to play on a team. But there can also be other advantages to playing high school tennis, like you become an all-state tennis player. To me, it's a win-win if everyone plays. Think about it this way. If everyone plays, then your high school matches, if you're playing number 1 for your school, you're going to play a ton of good players in your league, in your high school matches, and you don't need to travel 500 miles to go play someone good. So the more players who are good tennis players who play high school tennis, stronger high school tennis becomes, and the more valuable it becomes for the good players because they're playing other good players.
Right. And also, like when McEnroe was a freshman in high school and you're a senior, people don't need to stop and think about that. When your kid gets to college, a freshman's going to play a senior. I always tell parents, it's the last year 14s. That's the freshman year. And then you have 5 years to play for. So as last year 14s, when you get to college, you're playing against the kids that are in the 16s and 18s. No, I think that high school tennis definitely needs a shot in the arm. It's to me, tragic that it's not what it once was. I lived in Texas for 10 years, and it was a big deal. A big deal to play on your high school tennis team. And, then you get to interact with the other athletes. And I think that junior tennis is just too separated from the mainstream. They're not around the other athletes in high school, and that's sad.
Oh, absolutely. And, part of it is also at my high school, the athletic director is a fantastic guy. And when I was interviewing for the job, he said to me, I care about tennis. I care about all my teams. And he was totally true to his word. And, there are probably some athletic directors who are really more focused on the major sports, and I get that. But to have an athletic director who is supportive of the tennis program and all the sports, I have found to be just really very helpful as a high school coach. And he's very wise, and he's able to advise me on, how to handle kids in different situations. I would say if anyone's listening and is thinking of becoming a high school coach, I very much encourage it. I would also say, make sure that you have the buy-in from your athletic director. That can definitely make a difference in making it a rewarding experience as a coach.
I think one thing along the lines of high school tennis is to have the players go to practice. It's hard for me to stomach a kid's on the team and he can just show up for the matches. Could you imagine that in basketball or football? Hey, coach, I'll see you at the game.
Steve, I might only partially agree with you there, which is fine, but not always agree. I think as a high school coach, you have to try to manage it, right? It depends on the situation. If you have a kid who's just miles better than everybody else, you may let him practice outside a couple times a week and then come to practice, and you can you can do handstand drills, help him. So you might need to find a balance potentially. But I do get your main point that I would never support just showing up to matches. No, I think it is important that they are truly integrated into the team, and that they are also not only helping their own game, but they're also helping all the other kids on the team. That's really, really important.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you have to be clever to compromise. When we will film someone and say, well, we're going to film you, but it's not pertaining to your game. You're an advanced player. You have your own coach. But we're going to film you just so you know how to teach the underclassmen, the younger players. I think a feeder system, I do think that not only to have high school tennis have a shot in the arm, but with junior high tennis, to have the players that are on the team. And there's only so many hours in the day, and especially the regular schoolers, they don't have as much time for their own game, but yet the sense of community to give back. I do think that throughout the United States, high school football coach, they have a pretty good idea, who's in the 6th and 7th grade that's going to be able to be on their varsity football team one day.
Yeah,
because they have that feeder system. They have little kid football, so they can play the big kid football. But I think it's unfortunate that there's no system where the kid just is in grade 9 and they're just signing up for high school tennis, and there wasn't any. Not that this necessarily needs to be match play, but there needs to be some connection, even going to the to the elementary age. So kids are indoctrinated, and they really want to be part of tennis.
Correct. I totally agree.
Back to your book. I know that we have our website. It's free. I talked to Stuart. Why don't you just make a few comments on having your book be on our website?
Oh, sure. So, Steve, you had the idea that we would put the book up on the website, obviously free of charge. And I think that's a fantastic idea. And then I know you talked to Welby's son, Stuart, because we wrote the book together. But it's all Welby's ideas, right? People aren't interested in Ed Weiss's teaching method. They're interested in Welby Van Horn's teaching method. So Stuart was gracious enough to agree. So I think it's now just a question of putting the book up on the website. And I think sometimes I've seen on Amazon it's selling for some ridiculous amount of money, and that's ridiculous. I'm really excited that someone can go on your site, the GreatBase site, and be able to read and enjoy the book. So that's exciting to me, and I thank you for the opportunity to have it on your site.
Oh, the thank you goes the other way. No, I know that the book is a collector's item. I've seen it sold for, I don't know, $150, $175.
Yeah.
I would love to, I got to tell people, reach out from the grave and improve tennis teaching. People need to know the Welby Van Horn balance approach. Say if there was just, 10 chapters and one was, we're going to agree on the grip determines the angle of the racket face, the angle of the racket face determines the angle of the racket path. We have to understand grips. But then the tennis court itself, just the realities of the court, the facts of the court, the dimensions of the court. But yeah, one of those 10 chapters for sure would just every coach, and certainly worldwide, but here in the U.S., I think no substitute for a good beginning. So if kids could get a better start, and it's very simple. The parents could look through your book, and it would really help out. I think sometimes it's way too expensive to take private tennis lessons, especially where you live up in Connecticut, where you have to rent an indoor court, and you should be able to teach tennis in your basement, teach tennis in your garage, and simply get kids off to a good start. And then
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it is an accessible system, and I know I do a little teaching at Four Seasons Racket Club that's near my house, and there's a gentleman who owns the club with his wife, Greg and Kelly Moran, and they have found they've kind of used your system or integrated to some degree into their teaching, and your system integrates Welby's stuff, and you see the results. And it doesn't have to be someone you're developing to be the world champion, but it's just someone who you're just trying to teach the fundamentals of tennis to. And some of the students will take it to the next level, and others will not, but that's fine too. So I do think it is an accessible system and an understandable system.
And Welby's definitely a cornerstone. I communicate quite often with Greg Moran, and I'm flattered when you say, "Well, my system." But as you know, it's really the big three would be Braden, Vandermeer, and Van Horn. But just to talk to you about Jim Layton or Ed Faulkner or Bill and Chet Murphy, Alex Mayer. There's so many great tennis teachers who've gone before us. Actually, I know one time you talked about spending some time in Florida when you retire. I was just sent well over 100 books from the Vic Braden Library. And the Tennis Channel didn't want the books. And there's still some that Vic's widow, Melody, she just wants to go through them because the author of the book wrote nice messages to Vic.
Sure.
But that's another thing too, is that the written word, it's just very powerful. I mean, people, I think, really to be a student of the game, we're always telling people if they could go and if they could read the book Braden put together, Tennis for the Future, which is the updated version, Tennis 2000.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to argue with any points made in that book because it's fact-based. And, I think that's where I always tell people in ice hockey, I mean, I don't think people in tennis have enough of a BS detector. Now, someone like yourself, from a young age, you were fortunate to meet very good tennis teachers.
Yeah.
To be able to tell good from bad, to be able to tell competent from incompetent. I think that's where the parent, it's so easy for kids, I shouldn't say kids, for young people to make quite a bit of money per hour. And at best, they're just a glorified sparring partner. They're not really teaching fundamentals. Yeah,
I mean, I don't criticize people for what they do, but I would just say, if you do anything in life, if you can, learn to try to master your craft the best you can, it does create, I think, a real inner satisfaction. In the long run, to do that as opposed to just marking time. I would encourage people to, try to learn as much as they can, and in the long run, I think they'll look back with satisfaction that they did that.
No, well put. I mean, when it comes down to, some people are just not fortunate to have, the comparative experience. If you have someone who truly knows their craft. But I think that the idea of, again, a lot of people, they don't know they're giving out bad information. And I think of young people, but it's also, say, an entry-level adult. But a young kid, we lose so many kids in tennis. The degree of difficulty, pickleball, it's a little bit easier. It's like playing with a wiffle ball versus a baseball. You can appreciate that because you started playing baseball. Or lacrosse. To be a great lacrosse player is like anything. You have to dedicate so much time. But the learning curve in lacrosse is so much different than the learning curve in tennis. It's pretty much uphill to get two young people to go out and successfully rally a tennis ball back and forth. Well,
yeah, look, we have to be honest about our sport. An individual sport is, that's a harder sell for most kids. You play in our area. I came to Connecticut in '82, and the growth in lacrosse from that time to now has just been phenomenal. And part of it is it's a team sport, and it's just, you're part of a team, and there's an enthusiasm to the team, and it's not all on you. And tennis is harder in that way because it is on you. And it's, we all coach kids, and with kids who worked hard and good ability, but they'll play a match and they get nervous and they lose, and you have to be an amateur. You have to. I said amateur psychologist. You need to work with the personality and the kids, and tennis is hard in that way. It just is tougher than a team environment. But on the other hand, there are a lot of lessons you can learn from tennis, and also you are kind of a master of your own fate, right? In other words, if you're a basketball player and you don't make your high school team, you're probably that you're not going to be able to keep really advancing your game. But in tennis, you can. There's always a tournament to play at your level, and then you could keep working on your game your entire life, and you only need one other person to play. You don't need if you're a football player, you need 21 other people. So tennis has also had tremendous advantages in that way as well. But as for someone like myself who loves tennis, I have to realize that there are some disadvantages and tough aspects to teaching people tennis and getting young people involved. And you have to realize that, but also emphasize to people the tremendous, values and that people can get out of playing tennis, and life lessons. So, you got to pick your strengths of your sport and work with those.
Oh, that's well said, well stated. Tell us one last question. Retirement. What are you going to do?
I am going to do more tennis. I'll do even more work with the organization that is here, Norwalk, Stanford Grassroots Tennis and Education. I will probably, and I'll keep up with the high school coaching, and I'll probably maybe do some more. I do some lessons at the local club I mentioned before, and I'm lucky enough to have a court at the house, so I do some of that as well, and just work with juniors around here on a volunteer basis as well. And we have a second home in Florida, in the Sarasota area, so we'll probably spend a little bit more time down there. But I'm looking forward to tennis, and more tennis, but also, of course, spending more time with my wife, and doing some traveling. And I have two children who are now married. My son just got married a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure that we will try to spend a lot of time with them, and then if they have kids, with their grandkids.
That's fantastic. Well, we'll have to get together when you're in Sarasota. Compare notes.
Absolutely. By the way, sometimes on podcasts, the host will ask for some recommendations. There's one gentleman who I've learned a tremendous amount from that I haven't mentioned, and his name is Don Brasso, who's a pro out in California. And he's one of the most knowledgeable people I know, and he had some, back in the day, he worked with Vandermeer, knows a lot about Braden, and he is one of the best coaches I know, and I think you'd really enjoy talking to him. He's out in the LA area. So shout out.
That'd be great.
Shout out.
Go ahead.
Yeah, shout out to Don. He's he isn't all that well known, though. Again, he's developed some very fine tennis players. But he's one of the most thoughtful people I've ever come across as far as thinking about tennis and as a teacher. I think you would enjoy talking to him.
Yeah, no, I'll contact you for his contact information. I also think too that there's too much promotion in tennis. Where, as you said, it's an amazing story with your childhood coach that he had coached Butch Patty, who won Wimbledon, and you'd never been told that by him. Amazing, because again, I think there's just too much bragging, too much recruiting as well. Instead, it's too. I would say too many third base coaches. People want to be at a tournament, hand out business cards, and I think that's a shot in the arm for tennis. Is that if we could, and that's one thing about your book, your efforts with the Welby Van Horn system, is if we did a better job with beginners would stay with the sport. But I do think too many times it's very difficult. It's not easy to teach beginners. I mean, it does require a skill set, and that's one of the a great byproduct in talking to you is reinforcing just your emphasis on tennis education, but then the work with Welby, and then to get that system in people's hands because it's a treasure and it shouldn't be a lost treasure.
Appreciate. Well, just what you said reminded me of once saw an interview with Emilio Sanchez, and he said so a lot of tennis clubs, they're the best pros they have, quote unquote best pros they have working with the really good players, and then they'll have a high school student teach the beginners. And he said it should be reversed. I mean, you will obviously would like great teachers throughout, but the most important years are your first few years when you're learning tennis. So the best teachers should be teaching the kids when they're beginning, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's blind leading the blind.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of perverse that you would. I mean, not knocking high school kids, but it takes years and years to learn how to become a good tennis teacher. It's the phrase is tennis professional, right?
Right.
It's a profession, and it takes a long time to learn. I mean, there are some people who are naturally good teachers and figure things out, but as a general statement, it takes a long time to learn how to become a good tennis teacher.
Appreciate you saying that. I also think with the Bradenism, where if the kid who buys his ice cream cone and puts it in the middle of their forehead, I think you also want to judge a program on how the worst player plays.
Yeah,
it's terrible to say someone has to be at the bottom, but there is a ladder, and that the players that are not as gifted from an athletic standpoint, that they can still rally. They still can go out and play. Go ahead.
I agree. To me, I've always said to myself, look, it's great if a coach has someone who becomes a fantastic player, right? But to me, the sign of a great coach is that they are able to develop a large body of number of people who can play, right? And play could just be they've mastered the fundamentals, or it could be that they compete well in their local section. But if you produce a lot of people who can play the game, that to me is a testament of a really good teacher. Because as I said, you can always capture lightning in a bottle once or twice. But if you can get, as you said, someone who doesn't have all that much talent and make them become a pretty nice tennis player, that's really saying something.
Yeah. Ed, I appreciate you being a guest. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you said so many valuable things that our listeners will benefit from, and we'll follow up with the interview you suggested. We'll follow up with having your book be placed on the website.
I want to thank you again for that opportunity. And I didn't understand why you would want to interview someone like myself, but I guess you can check the box for 65-year-old lawyers from Fairfield County, Connecticut who love tennis. So you filled that quota.
No, you have a lifetime in tennis. You've played tennis. You've met so many great tennis teachers. What you've done just with your written work, what you've done as a volunteer. Your story in tennis, hats off to what you've done. It's because you've done that really out of passion. You've done that out of love for the game. And
I appreciate
that. That's so true. That's perfect.
Well, thanks so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Ed, thanks. Good night. And
Good night.
We'll follow up. All the best to you and Karen.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, listeners, podcast 105. So many pearls. So humble to say that why would you want to interview a lawyer on our tennis podcast? But what a background in tennis. We'll follow up. So many great points. But again, the one thing is to put forth the effort to have more people be able to read the book that he wrote on Welby Van Horn's system of tennis. But listeners, thanks for listening. And Ed Weiss, thanks again for your time. Adios, amigos. 105 in the books.